Our World of Red France series, and as you can see, the communists are on the defensive, with the democracy starting to get more and more in the war. With the United States starting to get worried about it. So the United States, along with the Philippines, which they still hold at this point, joins the Democratic League, as the Imperial League watches this in shock. With Vietnam questioning about joining, but at this point, India starts to lose ground in Tibet, which is bad because they can easily get encircled being pushed back here. And then Pakistan pushes them back, threatening their capital, which falls, so they move it down to probably Mumbai or Kolkata, one or the other. And on the German front, they start approaching into southern German land, as they manage to take out Hungary, Slovakia, and Poland, all puppets of Germany except Hungary. And they start to move up here, and German forces are put on the defensive. With the Democratic League starting to see the situation worsening, they're more and more likely to join because they don't want imperialists ruling all over the world. With them headed down to Khartoum, well, instead of declaring war on their probably friends in this timeline, they decide to invade northern Yemen to annex it. And with India falling back, they have the withdrawal from a big chunk of the Tibet front. With this happening, they decide to withdraw all the way to Bhutan. And then they are kicked out by China, who then quickly and swiftly manages to kick them out of Myanmar. And this is a big deal because it means India is now on the defensive, as they are getting pushed back rapidly towards Kolkata. But a stalemate's achieved eventually about here, which isn't good. With Khartoum being taken and Egypt's on the brink of surrender. So they do this. And then Egypt is forced into surrender, which is not a good situation on the ground. With them getting pushed back even further. They're pushed back all the way, too. And then these forces decide to evacuate because if a landing does happen, they're in trouble. No resources can easily get in, so this is forced to surrender. Which means Libya is next. So they invade the coast, knocking out the country, and then they kick out all other forces in the country. And then they start invading Algeria, Morocco, which causes a stalemate. With them moving into Italy. Well, at this point, Vienna falls, followed by Prague, followed by them reaching Berlin. With the Americans starting, with some aid being sent in by the Americans, which doesn't do much, but staying more of Germany is now safe. So it does a tiny bit, and they push back in the Italian front. But with the Russians being enraged by this action, they threaten to teach them a lesson. And by lesson, I mean this. They start an invasion of Finland. With Finland in the war now, this means one thing. As they start approaching in further. With this becoming the front line in Finland, with Finland resisting there. And not long after, the Democratic League declares war on Russia. War on Russia. They declare war on Russia. This is Nigeria, Cameroon, South Africa, some colonies of Britain, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the US. Yeah. Ethiopia too, and the United Kingdom. I might have missed some, but it doesn't really matter. And Greenland is part of Canada in this timeline, with Iceland still independent, I believe. With the first forces that enter the continent decide to push back in the North African front. With these forces arriving and with the help of Communist France and Communist Germany, they start pushing back. And while the countries that aren't really rebuilt and re-governed are having trouble because they couldn't rebuild their military in this much time. And well, they're in trouble as these countries are cut off. Tanzania, followed by Kenya, followed by Uganda, followed by southern parts of Sudan start to crumble, with Sudan surrendering and Egyptian rebels move down to the south to help with this war. As they move through the desert, yes, they move through the desert. With the Russians deciding to hold the front at the Suez Canal and hold in Europe, with them deciding to go on a massive offensive in Europe, pushing into Berlin, but Germany manages to stop them. And in the Italian front, they move in more. But they move too fast in some of these fronts. And that's going to be a problem. With Germany being pretty well off to do this, as they make a spearhead, and Italy starts pushing them back, with Rome falling back in Italian hand, and Germany moves forces to meet up with the puppet of Italy. As they move in further, with Australian forces finally arriving in India's front. But what China didn't realize is they also moved into Thailand and Vietnam. So once they find this news out, war is declared. But one problem, they barely managed to invade because for some reason they thought it was a good idea to attack a country they knew was full of, well, forces. So the help of Australian and New Zealandish forces, India manages to meet up with the Myanmar front. And the significance of this is that Myanmar is falling again. With China managing to hold in northern Vietnam, but their hold in by Myanmar is falling apart. Forces in Myanmar start getting disorganized and everything because they were occupying it. But now they're about to be encircled, so most of the troops manage to escape, but not all, as Myanmar is forced out of China's hand. And then India and Vietnam is fully liberated from China's control, with them rebuilding their militaries as they bring in increased conscription. With something, when the democratic forces then manage to successfully invade here. And with the help of Yemen and Oman, which agrees to help them, the UAE doesn't want to upset, knows that if they do lose, they're not going to exist. But Oman and Yemen realize they're not going to exist if they win, because they're going to invade them. As they move in. And Saudi Arabia's front isn't having much fun. As they move into Jordan to re-liberate it from Saudi aggression. Well, the collapse has begun. And well, once this happens, and they move in like that to get up to this area, Saudi Arabia decides surrender is their best option, which pushes the imperialists back pretty far. Yeah. And the Democratic League is planning on attacking the communists after this war. As they move in, and finally Vienna is taken back, followed by Prague and major cities. They've taken back Berlin, and forces are moving into Yugoslavia. Within Finland, the Finnish forces push the Russians back significantly, but the Russians still hold territories in significant amounts too, but they're starting to have trouble. Well, in Greece, the landing happens on the island of Crete, which moves into Greece, which they go into Albania, Yugoslavia, and Croatia to connect the front. And, well, for Iran and for Russia, it's not going well. They're losing key areas. Well, India, to disrupt their enemies, decides to launch an incursion into Tibet. But this time, they manage to get Nepal and Bhutan to join in with them. Oh, actually, yeah. And while Pakistan gets pushed back significantly, especially in the north, and while this time they invade Tibet, it's much more successful, with them realizing what to do with the trains to invade faster. And quickly, they're back in Tibet, with Tibet being overrun by India. Same with southern China getting invasions. It's not looking good for this front for the imperialists. And then they managed to push back all the way to here, which is a big thing because that means Russia's stuck in East Europe. And while they managed to make a landing in Turkey, which they used to connect with Turkey's Middle Eastern territories, well, they managed to reestablish the Turkish Empire. No, the Turkish Commune. Whatever you would call it. And Pakistan gets pushed back out of key territories. And well, Finland is getting pushed back, but not too much, so it's not too bad in that front. Well, a decision by America is made to land from the Philippines on Taiwan. And then they managed to land on the island of Hainan. And they managed to land into Japan. Japan isn't really being defended, so they quickly overrun the country, and it decides to surrender. And as you can see, the front lines are rapidly improving, and the imperialists, are going to collapse in the next video by the looks of it. As Germany makes one last offensive here, which takes back most of Poland, Hungary, and manages to connect up and take Istanbul and move it back to Turkey. And, well, Turkey manages to just about push the Russians out. And all the key areas of Iran are liberated. Some of the key areas of Iran are liberated, and they've reestablished Iran. And Bulgaria is pushed back, and that's pretty much all for today's video. Please like, subscribe, and comment. Why should you subscribe? So we get to 3,000 subscribers by December 25th. We got 22 days to do it, and we just over 100 subscribers to go. That's all for today's video. I'll mapper out.